Ready. Ready. Ready.
Hello, welcome to Enlightning. So glad to have you here on this Friday. Today we're going to talk about access policy orchestration with Hexa. And we have Gerry here to teach us about it. Gerry, tell us about yourself, please.
Hello, Whitney. Thanks for having me on this first Friday of 2024. So awesome to get the year started off on this Enlightening stream. Love it.
Yes, me too.
So I'm currently at Strata Identity, and I'm head of standards over here. And I've worked in standards and in identity for a long time. Before this, I was at Axiomatics, a fine-grained authorization vendor. And I worked at Burton Group, which is now part of Gartner, for a long time. And before that, I worked at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City in their IT department. So I've sort of straddled some different parts of the industry over time.
Super cool. I have a question right off the bat. So I said access management and you said identity management. Are those the same thing? Yeah.
Now you're starting already.
Yeah, maybe I should wait till I'm behind the board for this part.
No,
Yeah.
that's all right. That's all right. It's all part of a big puzzle. There's many different pieces. Typically the industry is referred to as IAM, Identity and Access Management.
Okay.
It depends on your perspective or where you work or where your focus is. Do you think more about identity and authentication, or do you think more about governance and access? So yeah, they're all part of all pieces of the same puzzle.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm pretty new to tech. I wrote my first line of code in 2019. And so pretty much the hardest part of getting into it is understanding the nuance and the jargon around the semantics, really, of all of these concepts.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. There are long running debates about many aspects of this with different people. So you're absolutely right.
Well, and so I don't know if I told you this, Gerry, but so you're the third technology as part of an access management series that I'm doing. So I've talked with someone from Dex. I've talked. Oh gosh, what did I do yesterday? Anyway, I have Keycloak coming up next week. Oh, yesterday was Cubescape. It wasn't identity management. So I guess you're the second one. I'm sorry about that. So I'm very interested in what separates these projects from each other and how everything relates and what comes in. So, but we'll skip that. I have questions. You have the answers, but I'm going to wait till I'm behind the board. And let's talk about sourdough bread.
Yeah, we were talking about that before the show here. Yeah.
Yeah, so you had said the best story about your personal sourdough bread that you make.
Yeah, so my sister gave my wife and I a sourdough starter when we first got married, and we've kept it going now some 30 some years. So that's pretty cool. We keep that on the counter and take care of it every week. So that's really great.
Does it have a name?
No, we didn't name it. We've given portions of it and shared it with other people, and they have named it. But no, we've never given it a name. We just call it the Beast.
So it does, yeah.
So I guess
brewed my own kombucha for about a decade. And so I
All
had,
right.
a SCOBY. That was my buddy until it wasn't. It's gone now. But so we want to, I'm going to put some stuff in the chat. I'm going to put in hexaorchestration.org, which are the docs if you have more questions about Hexa. And then oops, I just put it in the private chat. Let's do this better. And then I want to mention part of why I'm doing this series on access management is some of you know that I also host a show called You Choose on DevOps Toolkit. And so we're going to do an episode, at least one episode on identity and access management about IAM. And so we have our first episode of chapter 3, which is a whole chapter on security system design choices. That's coming up on Tuesday, and our first one's going to be about admission controller policies. So for that show, we'll have on lots of different admission policy guests who represent different projects. For that show, each project gets only 5 minutes to talk about their project. And then at the end, the audience will vote to see which one that we're going to put into our ongoing demo. So it's a funny contrast to this one, because for this one, Gerry might be teaching all of us about Hexa for an hour and a half or 2 hours. But for Gerry, if you are the guest, which you're welcome to be the guest on You Choose representing Hexa, you get only 5 minutes. So it's a funny contrast. And then I'm going to quickly put in a link to the schedule so you can see what episodes are coming up tentatively. And one more thing, and that is Gerry was telling me beforehand that you do something with the Open ID Foundation.
Yes.
So, yeah. Can you tell me what that organization is and what your involvement is?
Sure. So the Open ID Foundation is one of the industry standards organizations. So somewhat similar to IETF, which probably everyone knows about, or
No,
OASIS or W3C.
I don't know about it.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't know about most things.
That's all right. Well, it's an industry standards organization. So they're the people behind things like OpenID Connect, which is the standard that enables single sign-on across, multiple security domains. And they have some additional new work around shared signals, which is an up and coming standard that's being worked on. Very exciting to see that come together. And excuse me. And then I was an instigator to starting a new working group over there called Authorization Exchange, or AuthZen for short. So a group of us got together at the last couple of identity conferences, the one called Identiverse, and we were brainstorming about all of these different fine-grained authorization products that are on the market. They're somewhat similar, but slightly different technically, and there's no interoperability between them. So the AuthZen working group is looking to define some interoperability profiles and some other best practices and things like that. And so that's gotten off the ground here in the last few months, and we're hoping to do some interoperability demonstrations toward the middle of this year at some of the major identity conferences that are out there.
Cool. I didn't know there were identity conferences. That's exciting. That's
yes,
super cool.
there are. Some of the major ones are the European Identity Conference that's taking place in Berlin first week in June, and then Identiverse is sometime in May. I forget the exact dates. And then Gartner has an identity conference both in Europe and also here in the US. The US one is, I think, late November or in December.
Cool. And who's likely to participate in an identity conference?
Oh, you get a whole bunch of vendors that are in there. Large vendors like Microsoft and Amazon, but also lots of smaller vendors like Strata Identity, who I work for. Will be at most of these events. And then, lots of attendees from different companies that are identity architects or security architects and working on all of those things we talked about earlier, authentication, governance, authorization, and so on.
So identity is pretty much at the core of a lot of security, at least the application layer security. Because in order to say like who's allowed in the system, you have to have a reliable way to say who a person or a process is.
That's
yes?
right. Yes, absolutely.
I'm learning. That's cool. One thing, if those of y'all in chat, if you want to say hello, I would love to hear from you. And also I'd like to know, but that's what I understand. We're going to talk about that some today.
That's right. That's the topic for today.
Excellent. All right. So I'm about ready to take notes. And the first thing I want to know is, what was the world like? Oh, let me make myself bigger. Oh, Kormaju's here. Hello, Kormaju. Yay. We have Kormaju. Hi from India. Thanks for coming again today, Kormaju. And Kolawola is here too. Hi, Kola from Calgary, Canada. Thanks for being here. Cool. So how I'd love to start this is by talking about what was the world like before Hexa that caused Hexa to need to be created?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is about that poll question you just mentioned, about the multi-cloud world, right? Because over the last several years, organizations have been moving their workloads and data to the cloud. And what has happened is we've just introduced new challenges for how to manage access to those resources. Because if you think across Microsoft, AWS, and Google, and Oracle, and others, they all have their own way to manage access. They're not interoperable. They're not the same. They're similar, but not the same. So that's the challenge, is you need a lot of subject matter expertise on each of these platforms to get your access rules and policy settings correctly established. And so that was just a lot of complexity and a lot of extra work. And so that was, that's part of the issue that we're trying to address with Hexa.
I have a question that might be a silly question, but that's how I roll. And that is, when people started migrating to the cloud, did they have this idea that they would choose a cloud provider and that would be their only cloud provider? And then like how and why do companies need to access lots of different clouds?
Yeah, I think most organizations try to have a primary cloud provider, but especially for large companies or large organizations, they have different kinds of business units that have different requirements. So you might go to one for analytics, or you might go for another one for data storage. Another one might give you the best pricing for compute or what have you. So there could be different reasons. But we've seen some research that on average, I forget the numbers exactly now, but on average, companies could be working with 6 or 7 different cloud systems and providers and applications.
Wow. So before Hexa, the problem is one organization needs to access a lot of different resources on a lot of different clouds. And they need specialists for each different cloud. Like it's hard to navigate.
Right.
Okay. And how does that trickle down to the user's perspective? Like if I'm working at that organization, I need to have separate credentials for each different.
Well, the credentials issue, the single sign-on topic is one that has been addressed by lots of work done over the years, and this is where OpenID Connect, which we mentioned earlier, that enables single sign-on across domains, and things like SAML, the security assertions markup language before it. So the issue of users having different credentials has been solved in many ways. It's not perfect, but we're talking about, once the user logs in, what do they have access to? And so if those settings are not correct, then they may be blocked in doing their job because they don't have access to a system, or they don't have enough access to the different resources in that system to do their job. And then they have to go and request that additional access, or request that from an administrator, or through a workflow process, for example.
So that's okay. So as a complete new person to security, I didn't understand that was two different problems, the issue of logging on in the first place and the issue of what you can access once you're logged in.
That's right. And there's lots of layers to go through, but, we're focusing on, once you have logged into a system, now what do you have access to?
Okay, great. So will you give me, please, then a definition of Hexa? Or
sure. Well, policy orchestration in general, let's start with that. So policy orchestration is a concept that allows you to manage different access rules and policies across these different systems, and to do it in a vendor neutral way.
Okay. Will you repeat that, please?
Sure. So policy orchestration enables the management of different policy formats from many providers like cloud systems, data systems, networks, in a vendor neutral way.
Can I put in a vendor neutral way from here?
Sure.
Okay. So once you access a system, like you logged into the system, there you write policies. The company writes policies that help define what users can access what things. And so every system has its own way of writing policies. And so policy orchestration is a way to enable them centralize the management, or have a unified way, a single way to talk about policies, regardless of what system it's being used in.
I like unified, yes.
Unified? Okay, cool. I'm going to get some more colors out.
And some of the sessions you mentioned that you're covering in the You Choose series, for example, is covering actually some of the different layers, because we talk about identity and authenticating, but what about the infrastructure? Who can set up containers, or who can configure more compute or memory for different systems? I mean, there's access rules and policies associated with that as well. And then, of course, you have all of these APIs and microservices that are running, the data systems, the network itself. They all have policies, if you will, or configurations to control that. And they all do it in different ways. So that's what we're trying to unify here.
I'm starting to understand. It's a beast.
It really is, yes.
So is Hexa, or I guess I'll let us get into some more context, and then I'll ask this question. I'll hold on to it.
Okay.
So
what we should talk about next, I think, is that there's two pieces here to think about. There's IDQL, or Identity Query Language, which is the neutral format. And then Hexa is the open source that actually does the work of putting it into the running systems.
Okay. So IDQL is like the L is for language. It's like a specification.
Yes.
And then so Identity Query Language.
Yeah, or just IDQL for short.
I'm going to write out the full thing this time.
Okay.
And then I'll abbreviate it for the rest. IDQL. And will you define that for me, please?
Yes, this is the neutral format for defining policies, or the neutral standard for defining policies.
By neutral, we mean vendor neutral, right?
Yes.
And then, okay, I want to ask this question. Is the policy unique to infrastructure, or is it also like Kubernetes level policy?
It's general purpose. So the work we have done so far is mostly at the identity and application level, but the concepts that we'll talk about today are applicable to the infrastructure, data, and networking as well.
Okay. So is this correct? Identity query language is the vendor neutral standard for defining policy?
Yes. And it's a fairly simple model. We call it a 5-tuple model. Because if you write below here, it's, it's subject, action, resource, scope, and condition. Those are the 5 elements.
And that's of IDQL policy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, repeat those for me, please.
Subject, action, resource, scope, and condition.
Okay.
And these are elements that can represent the vast majority of different, access rules or policies that you might have.
Yeah, I'm feeling that. Like even just like I did a series on admission controller policies, and for those it was important to know, like, okay, not only what resource are you making a policy around, but what action. Like it's a resource plus action situation. Cool. So we have a question from Kormaju.
Yes.
Hexa provides infrastructure access to only Kubernetes and managed cloud providers. Does it provide access at the operating system level?
So we do, yeah. So we do not do the operating system level, but we do go beyond just K8s or those kind of the infrastructure layer. Like I said a few moments ago, the work we've done on the actual software is today focused on the identity and application layers, but the concepts are applicable beyond that. Probably not the OS though. That's pretty low level, in the kernel. So I don't think we're going to venture into that space.
That makes sense. And when I've seen kernel level policy or kernel level anything, it tends to be at least eBPF related, or at least have some sort of eBPF relevancy. But Kormaju, we did episodes on Falco, which does policy at that level, and so does Falco really does alerting at that level, and then Cube Armor is the other one that we've done for operating system level or system call level policy. Cool. Cool. So now are we on to Hexa?
Yes, we are, because
okay,
that this is the building block. So IDQL is the building block. It's the neutral format that we use, and great. Here's a neutral format. We could just publish it and say to the world, go out and adopt this. And but we tend to be more like show rather than just tell about something.
Yes.
And we started this Hexa open source project to actually show how this can work. Because the idea is that we can take IDQL and translate it into a format that Google and Amazon and Azure, for example, can consume, because we're not replacing the runtime decision and enforcement apparatus. We are just a policy management layer. So Hexa was started to begin doing research and experimenting and a lot of trial and error to figure out, okay, how can we translate IDQL to that format that those systems support, and vice versa? Can we connect to a Google or an Amazon and discover what resources exist already, what policies exist, and pull them into an interface and display them in this neutral way in IDQL, So that's
Okay.
that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years.
Cool. I will. One question is what other groups have adopted the IDQL policy standard?
Well, we're brand new, so this is
Okay.
still very early days.
Okay.
We do have some
Exciting.
folks looking at it, to potentially adopt it and incorporate it internally. So some folks are sort of sniffing around the edges at the moment, but it's not being used in production anywhere today.
Okay. I have another question that might be silly, but I'm just wrapping my head around all this stuff. So I've done an episode. I've learned about open policy agents, and
Yes.
they have a language Rego
Yes.
that is meant to be able to be used across different infrastructure types, and so it sounds kind of similar to IDQL. How's OPA's Rego different?
Well, Rego is really a programming language.
Okay.
You can do so many different things with Rego, whereas IDQL is a declarative policy language, and it's been designed to be translated into other formats, where Rego was created just specifically to support what Open Policy Agent needs.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. So will you help me with a Hexa is statement?
Yes. So Hexa is an open source project that translates IDQL to and from target system formats.
So you say this is brand new. What are people doing today?
Well, they're using the tooling that the vendor provides. So if you're configuring a Microsoft Azure environment, then you're just using all of the tools that Microsoft provides. Same thing for AWS, for Amazon Web Services. You're just using the tools that Amazon provides typically. There are some third-party products that will manage different aspects of that. There's a whole category of CIEM tools. I never quite remembered the full acronym meaning, but it's to manage a lot of the infrastructure settings. But I would say for the most part, customers are using the tooling that the cloud provider gives them.
Okay. So wouldn't it be great if I could define my organization's policies in IDQL format and then just apply those to every cluster and not have to rewrite them for every single place, infrastructure place?
Yeah, that's our goal. Because, for example, we have within the Hexa project on GitHub, we have a demo environment that anybody can download and utilize, and it all runs in Docker containers, and it's all self-contained. And in the demo, you can also, if you have other systems that connect to, for example, connect to a Google application. I have demos where I could connect to an app on Amazon or Azure, and I don't know how to configure those environments. If you give me a AWS console, there's not a whole lot I can do. But if I can use IDQL and Hexa, then I don't have to be a subject matter expert in those systems. As you just described, I can write it once and I can, push it out to many places.
Cool. I wonder if I want to, if we do you think we capture that? I'm going to write that. So IDQL.
I'm glad one of us has good handwriting to do this. I couldn't do this.
The user can write policy in one language.
Yes.
And apply that policy
To multiple places, yeah. To
but
multiple
I think
systems.
okay. I don't and apply the policy to multiple systems, but I don't think that captures that the systems are different across multiple clouds.
Yeah, across, yeah, absolutely. That's a
Okay.
valid statement.
Cool. Excellent. Great. So what would you like to teach about next?
Well, I think we can maybe describe some of the providers. We call them providers. These are the integrations with the different systems. We've built
Okay.
a handful of them already. They are supporting Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services. I'll let you catch up there.
So a provider is basically you've just written an integration that's part of Hexa.
Yes.
For putting IDQL into these particular languages,
Yes,
providers. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we'll define the provider first. So yeah, provider
Okay.
is the, the communication integration, or let's shorten it, it's the integration code that connects to a target system.
Is can I say Hexa integration code?
Yes.
Okay. That connects, does what?
That connects to a target system.
Okay.
And it also handles the mapping of the IDQL format to that system's format. Yep, mapping IDQL to that system.
Cool. So the providers you're going to list them off?
Yes. So we have for Amazon, for AWS, let's say.
Okay.
We can connect with AWS Cognito and their new Amazon verified permissions system.
Okay.
And also the Amazon API gateway.
Is AWS and Amazon, are those synonymous?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the branding folks tend to get more particular about that.
AWS API gateway?
Yes.
Okay.
And then for Microsoft Azure, are you going to have room over there?
I don't know.
So for Microsoft Azure, it's with Entra ID and their API manager.
INTRA.
No,
Intra ID.
It's E instead of I.
Intra. Okay, got it.
Entra. Yeah, it's my accent that threw you off. There you go.
Okay. And then Azure what?
API manager.
Cool.
And then for Google, it's the Google Identity Aware Proxy.
Woo. Google. How many Google ones are there?
Just that one.
Okay. Is this the last one, period?
No, then we have an open policy agent.
Ah. Okay.
And then OPA, yes, the other one we have right
Just
now.
all of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So what is like from your work in the field, describe to me like what a company's currently doing, and then they come to you and set up Hexa, and then what they're doing, the before and after.
Yeah, so we talked about the before, which you have up in the upper left there, right? They're mostly managing each target system individually, or there may be other aspects that they can use, some third-party tools to manage. But when they come to us, they say things like, well, we would like to have a way to manage access that's independent of that target system.
Yeah.
So that's really the goal. Or they'll come to us and say that, they'll describe the situation that I described earlier. They have all these multiple clouds that they have different applications and workloads running on, and they're just running into this complexity issue. Who has access to what? Inconsistent access across systems, and they're just trying to find better ways, more efficient ways to manage that. So that's why they're coming to us and learning more about Hexa and thinking about, okay, how can we use this? Is this a model that will really work for us? And that's the stage that we're in right now.
Excellent. Kormaju has a question. Gerry, can you provide 1-2 use case of how do we use Hexa in a Kubernetes cluster and a cloud environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say I'll focus on the cloud environment example. So we could have a business workload running in 2 clouds, for high availability, because as we know, cloud systems go down just like any other system. And so we want to have, as close to 100% availability as possible. So I might have that workload, say, running in Azure and in AWS, and I need to have the access rules to be the same. And so that would be an example where, I could write those in IDQL and use Hexa to keep each system up to date and in sync, and implementing the same rules across those environments, so that if I lose the primary system, I can immediately have the backup system ready to go, and it's I don't have to scramble to ensure that it's has the right rule settings.
Yeah, and it helps it so you're tool agnostic. So you do get pretty deep in these tools, but if you needed to move from one to another, you have that ability, the less you rely on the cloud specific tools.
That's true too. That can be another benefit, that it breaks some of that vendor lock-in, because and that's another interesting motivation here. The individual cloud platform owners, they're not necessarily motivated to help you manage workload on somebody else's. They'd say, well, bring it over here, we'll manage it all the same way.
Yeah. And then what about with Kubernetes?
Well, that's not an area we've looked into so far. Like I said, we've stayed up at the the application level up until this point. We've done a little bit of prototyping at the network and at the data layers, but not yet in that infrastructure space. Right
on. Cool. What would you like to talk about next?
I think it's interesting maybe to talk a little bit about the providers and some of the learnings we've had based on the work we've done with these different systems. The first thing is is there an API publicly available that has the functionality to manage the policy or manage configuration? So sorting that out is usually a little bit of effort, but not too hard. The more difficult thing we find is, okay, how do we map IDQL to and from these target systems. That's where a lot of our, heavy duty work comes into play. And up until now, we found 3 different ways that we integrate with these systems. So I think maybe that's interesting to talk about. So how do we describe that? 3 policy translation techniques.
Actually, I'm not even bored with the word. So I want to do IDQL to
IDQL translation techniques.
Cool. Fun.
Yeah, so the first one is the simplest use case. Where the target system just has a role-based model or a group-based model. So it's very simple. If you're in the manager group, you can do X. If you're an engineer, you can see this project list. So we call this mapping a group or a role to the policy API.
Mapping
a group or a role, ROL, role.
To
the target system format.
The target format. Okay.
The second one is where we can do complete translation of one policy language to another.
And what languages have you done that for?
For Amazon's Cedar language, Cedar like the tree.
Okay.
And for Google Common Expression Language.
Interesting. Do you know that there's a new object in Kubernetes called validating admission policy that uses the common expression language?
No, I do not.
Yeah, it's beta with Kubernetes 1.28, but
okay.
You have to turn on the feature flag to enable it. So maybe your Kubernetes integration is coming to you on a silver platter.
Right. That's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Cool. So that's number 2.
And number 3 was actually relates to OPA, Open Policy Agent. So as we were talking about OPA before, and we said that Rego is really not just a policy language, it's really a programming language. And so we were looking for ways to translate to and from IDQL to Rego or back. And because Rego can represent almost anything, that was just, an infinite sort of thing that we didn't have the resources or even the wherewithal to tackle. So the gang did some different research, and they found some other projects that were using an interpretation model. And this goes back to when you were talking about OPA on one of your live streams and how they have the triangle of Rego inputs and data. Well, we found a way to write a little bit of Hexa Rego that could directly interpret IDQL as the data input. So we sort of inverted that. So that's why we call this direct interpretation. So we're not translating IDQL to Rego. We're allowing Rego to interpret IDQL. So it's pretty cool.
And this is Rego specific. Can we write the Rego specific part into the number 3, or is it?
It's
more of a technique.
I would characterize it as, well, it's a technique that's, the technique is direct interpretation. And the example would be for Open Policy Agent. How about that?
Okay. Hexa related rego that interprets IDQL.
Yeah, so the example would be our integration with OPA. Do you want to write out more details than that here?
I don't want too much, but I just wanted, it's like the hexas in rego.
Yes. Well, we call it, it is Rego code, but we call it a Hexa Rego module. But folks can reach out to us and get more details. And actually the demo that I mentioned earlier that you can download and run from the GitHub repo is the OPA integration. So you can see it in action there.
So if you're managing your policies with Open Policy Agent currently, what benefit would you see by using Hexa?
Well, if you are already running it and you already have Rego policies, we do not have any means to translate them to IDQL or any other format.
Okay.
However, if you're greenfield or if you're deploying it new, you can write your policies in IDQL and they can run in the OPA system, but then you can also manage other environments also with IDQL. So you get that broader coverage of policy administration.
Okay, so IDQL can manage certain things that OPA and Rego cannot?
Yeah, because we're designed to enable you to build providers for any kind of system.
Okay.
We've started out.
My limitation in my understanding is that I don't understand. I just know OPA does other systems besides Kubernetes, and I don't know what other systems OPA does. So what you're teaching me now is that Hexa and IDQL can do more systems than what OPA can.
Yeah, I mean, there's OPA can be used for enforcing access rules for many other kinds of applications. It's probably most popular in the Kubernetes world. But you can use it as an alternative to the Amazon verified permissions, for example, that we mentioned previously.
You could use OPA or Hexa or both.
I would say OPA is comparable in many ways to Amazon verified permissions. Their functionality. Okay,
great. I still don't quite understand what Hexa does that's bigger than OPA.
Well, maybe we use those two as an example. So you can have different application groups. One is using OPA to manage access to some resources. And then some other department is using Amazon verified permissions to control access to their applications and resource. Well, we have one way to manage policies that will run in both. So that's the idea here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Excellent, thank you. All right, and what's the fourth one?
No, there's only 3.
Oh, 3, yes.
So far. So
far, cool. Excellent. What's next?
Yeah, so those that are adventurous enough that want to think about diving in and building their own provider to some other system, like Kubernetes for Kamaraju, maybe.
Yeah.
So we're doing a bit of refactor of the Hexa code base right now. So up until now, our initial work has been mostly centered around the different demonstrations that we wanted to do. And we're refactoring and moving some things around so it'll be easier for someone to come in and start to build their own provider and connect it to their own system. And so there's going to be different ways you can integrate. So maybe, let's say developer tools, all right? Since you talk to lots of developers. So we're going to describe some of the different ways to work with Hexa as a developer.
Okay. So this is, you can build your own provider and integrate your
Yes.
system. Okay, so integrating with Hexa as a developer is its own thing.
Yes.
Is this enough space, or should I start up here?
No, I think that's enough space there. Sure.
Okay. Hexa for developers is what I'm going to write.
Beautiful.
Cool.
All right. So Hexa is written in Go. So so the main API is, is a native Go API. And then we're now creating a CLI, a command line interface that will help you do, testing and scripting and so on.
Hexa written in Go, and then creating. So you don't have a CLI yet, but there's an upcoming CLI.
Yeah, CLI in progress.
Okay. And that will allow developers to do what?
Do testing and scripting.
Cool.
And we have a web UI. So that's what our demo admin portal uses. And then also
Cool.
in the future, we'll make a REST API so that folks using other languages can call into Hexa as well. So I'd say not even upcoming. It's not something we're working on right now, but definitely a REST API in the future.
Okay, I'm so to put upcoming.
Okay.
It's far, but it's
It's all relative, right?
In the blip of time that is our entire lifetimes.
Yeah.
Cool. One thing I'd be interested in learning more about, if you think it's relevant. Maybe you have your own things you want to talk about for this last part, and I respect that. But I'd be interested in learning more about the identity query language and what these 5 elements represent.
Okay, we could dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
So, a subject can be a human user, or it could be, a process, or a system process, an application identity, or a workload identity. So that's typically what a subject refers to.
Oh, we're gonna get into it now. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. For some reason, I thought you said we can get into that a little bit, and I thought you said in a little bit, and so I thought, okay. So I'm gonna write these up here. 5 elements. Okay, so subject. Okay, what's a subject, please?
So typically it's a human user or some kind of machine identity.
Okay.
In identity, we always talk about, the Alice and Bob scenarios. I don't know if you're familiar. Alice can do this, Bob's trying to do that. So yeah.
Okay.
Those represent the human user. And then of course, you have a workload or machine identity could be the subject.
Excellent. And then we have action.
Yeah, action, there's the traditional CRUD things, create, use, update, delete.
Update, delete, yeah.
But then, an application could have any kind of action. In a database, you think about select statements. So it's really germane to the application or resource, but you can think of create, read, update, delete as typical actions. If you're working in a publishing application, you could have who can author an article, who can edit it, who can publish it. There are different steps involved, right? And they could be considered actions.
Okay.
And then the resource, this is the thing or the object that you're trying to act on. And again, this could be almost anything. It can be as generic as a website or as specific as a Kubernetes configuration parameter. And everything.
Love it. Scope.
Yeah, scope. I typically use a data analysis here. So scoping could be, I can see all the records in the database that are in the same region that I manage.
Oh, okay.
So it's a filtering, let's say it's a filtering mechanism to further restrict what data I can act upon or what resource I can act upon.
So, for example, all the data in a database with a certain label.
Yes.
Cool. And one more, condition.
Condition. Yeah, so this could be represented by different things. Time of day is one condition. I can only access this resource during business hours. It could be location dependent. I can only access US person data when I'm in the US, or things of that nature.
What differentiates that from scope? It seems like you just named some things that limit scope too.
Well, they're sometimes related, but different, right? Because scope implies that you do have access, but we're going to filter it. We're going to refine or restrict it a bit. But condition is you can't get in here at all unless you meet this condition.
Okay. So a characteristic that must be met before access is granted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Certain hours.
Yeah, time of day. Okay. Certain hours, certain location.
Time of day, certain location. Cool. Great. I love that. That helps me understand what Hexa and IDQL can do. I accidentally wrote over my face, though. I got so excited. I forgot to leave room for me.
Yeah, you're running out of space there.
I usually remember to leave room for my head, but not today. Hi, Napalm. I'm so glad you're here. Happy 2024, friends. Thanks for being here. So if you have something you want to put in here, I think that's great. I also, if you want to do some recap and benefits, I think that's great too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of as well. Maybe to highlight a few benefits down here in the remaining space.
I love it. All right, let's do benefits and all right.
Well, I think in a world where we think of everything as code, we can now think of policy as code
Mm-hmm.
and get all of the benefits of that, so you can manage it in a way that you can, specifically set policy changes and then roll them back if need be, or incorporate it as part of your CI/CD pipelines, for example.
Good declarative. And CI/CD, version control, rollback.
Right.
Cool.
I think we touched on this maybe a couple times, but I think it's important to highlight is being able to manage policies consistently for compliance reasons. So we have a way to consistently manage policies across systems that are very different from each other.
Mm. Across different systems.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And we can implement Hexa without changing the target system. I think that's maybe something we've implied here, but I think it's worth calling out because we're just connecting to, the publicly available APIs that these systems create.
I like that. Can I do one?
Sure.
I like the avoids vendor lock-in one.
Okay, nice. And I'll have just one more for you since we're running out of space here, but it's a good one.
Ooh, I'm curious. What is it?
Well, it's more visibility into who has access to what. So it gives you, better governance.
Should I do better governance?
Governance.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Did that fit? Is it on there? I think so.
Yes.
Visibility into who has access to what.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Wow, we did it.
That's pretty amazing.
It's really cool. So if anyone has any questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, what I'm going to do, Gerry, if you're cool with it, I'm going to say all of this information to you. I regret not leaving room for my head. Maybe I'll.
We can see you there.
Yeah. So I'm going to say all this to you. You're welcome. Please do correct me as I'm going if I don't say something completely right. And I can modify the board, but we're going to make sure you imparted all this knowledge to me and to the community. Oh, and we have a question, of course, from Court Maju, which I love. What's a good way to learn IDQL?
Yeah, well, come, check out the project website and it'll connect you to the GitHub repo. As I said, there's a demo environment where you can have a working system that has some simple IDQL policy fragments in it. And of course, you can reach out directly to us and we're happy to do a one-on-one with you to show you more.
Cool. And hexaorchestration.org is the policy website. Is that correct?
Right. And the repo is on GitHub. So if you go to
idea.
hexa-org in GitHub, you'll find the code there. And there you go.
There you go. I'm gonna make myself shorter. Let me get Cormage's comments off there. I have sock feet on a hardwood floor, so I'm just doing the splits down here to get myself short enough to fit. All right, we're gonna do this. So in a world before Hexa, what happened was each cloud provider has their own way to manage access. I want to say right off the bat, I had confusion about like initial access, like login, versus access, like once your identity is known in the system, what you're allowed to be able to use and get to. So the issue of logging in has pretty much been solved with OpenID Connect. But
we're assuming that step has already been completed.
Yes. Okay. And so once you're in, still each cloud provider has a different way to manage like what resources you can access and what you're allowed to do with each resource. And so you need within an organization to have a specialist for each cloud to define policy for each cloud. And so that was a problem to need to navigate differently for each different system that an organization is using.
Mm-hmm.
So policy orchestration then enables the management of different policy formats in a vendor neutral way. And so specifically doing that using identity query language, or IDQL. So it's a vendor neutral standard for defining policy. And we talked about the 5 elements of an IDQL policy, which we'll get into later, because I want to hurry up and talk about Hexa, which this is what this episode is about. So we learned about Hexa, which is an open source project that translates that identity query language to and from the target system formats. So the identity query language is a specification, and Hexa is an implementation of that specification.
Perfect.
Great, thanks. So with the Hexa IDQL, the user can write the policy in that one language in IDQL, and then that policy can be applied to all different systems in an organization. So, and those systems can be across multiple clouds too. So multi-cloud, multi-system environments write policies in only one place and only one format. So then we talked about providers that Hexa works with. Providers like the Hexa integration code that gets the policies to and from the IDQL language into the vendor specific language. So that we talked about, these I don't understand. These are just syllables I went down, but we talked about Azure Entra ID, Azure API Manager, AWS Cognito, AWS Verified Permissions, AWS API Gateway, talked about the Google Identity Aware Proxy, and the Open Policy Agent, which is people say OPA. So those are right now the current providers for Hexa. So if you want, you could use Hexa and IDQL to write a single policy that can span all these different providers. But you can also build your own provider and integrate your own system. And so we have some techniques for how to do that. So one is the IDQL translation techniques that Hexa has used. So one is to map a group or a role to a target format. The other one is complete translation of one policy language to another. And remind me which ones you've done that with.
That's for Amazon Cedar and for Google Common Expression Language.
Yeah. And then we have direct interpretation. So an example of that is the Hexa's integration with Open Policy Agent using a Hexa Rego module. So if you're a developer and you want to use Hexa, Hexa's written in Go. It has a Go API. So upcoming CLI will allow devs to do testing and scripting with Hexa. There's also a Hexa web UI, and then eventually there'll also be a Hexa REST API, so you can use Hexa regardless of which language you're using.
Mm-hmm.
So more specifically about the identity query language policy, we have 5 elements to the policy. You need a subject, so this is like the human or the process that has an identity. And then we have an action. So what are they allowed to do? There's definitely CRUD, create, read, update, delete, but there are other actions too. Then the resource, so what resource is being acted upon? And the scope is a filtering mechanism. So you could say all the database in this, all the data in the certain database with this label, that's the scope of this particular policy. And then finally, there's a condition. So a characteristic that must be met in order to grant access. So we talked about time of day or a certain location that might work for that. And then finally, we went over the benefits of Hexa. So for one, you could do policy as code. So when policy is declarative, a code, it's declarative. You can incorporate it into your CI/CD pipeline. There's version control. You can roll back. You can, do everything you can do with normal code reviews. Have it in GitHub where you have people review your code before it gets applied. You can now do while you're managing your policy across your multi-cloud environment. So you can also manage the policy across the different systems in a consistent way. You can implement Hexa without changing your target system at all. You're just using Hexa as a proxy to be able to communicate, to translate IDQL to the target system. You can avoid vendor lock-in, and then also Hexa will give you better governance. So you have good visibility into who has access to what and across your entire estate. I think that's it. How do you feel?
I love that. That's wonderful. You did a great job.
Thank you. I did a great job because you did a great job. It takes 2 of us. So the way, I don't know if you've watched an episode to the end, Gerry, but the way we're going to end this is by, we have another question. Oh, it's a comment from Koramaju. Thank you, Koramaju. Koramaju says they're enlightened. If you need to manage access across different cloud providers, then we all need to deploy a Hexa.
Awesome.
Thanks, Koramaju. So I'm going to replay the theme music and we're just going to dance our goodbyes. You can just move your hands a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything drastic. Excellent. Thank you everyone for watching. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us, Gerry, and thanks for sharing your time and attention, everyone who watched the recording.
Thank you, everyone.
All the way to the end. Bye. Yeah. You're waving to the beat. There you go. Bye, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate you.